I'm gonna say.
Alright.
Okay, here we go.
This training is based on the registered behavior technician task list and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. From now on, I will allow you to simply read this so that you don't have to hear it a million times. But this is more RBT task list.
Why do you say it's independent of the BACB?
Because the BACB doesn't want to take responsibility, like we're
Perhaps
providing the training. It's not like the
Like they
BAC
are.
created
Right.
this. They want to like remove themselves of like liability or responsibility for saying you are good or bad. They want to be able to come audit this training and say like, no, you suck.
Okay, gotcha.
They don't tell you you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, your training's awful. Okay. This video module, I'm not sure what to call it. This little module is about the ABCs of behavior, the other building blocks of life besides DNA. Just like it from Jurassic Park. So a review of what we talked about last time. ABA focuses on behavior, environment, relationships. We're going to get more into that right now. We analyze the relationships between a person's behavior and environmental events, which we also is what our interventions are made up of to find out why behavior happens or does not happen. To do this, we use a simple 3-part unit known as ABC. You and me. Okay. So A stands for antecedent, which is what happens before the behavior. B stands for behavior, which is an instance of the behavior itself. And you can talk about an individual if you're watching a particular instance, or you can talk about, we're talking about hitting, and we're going to watch hitting as a general behavior. And C is the consequence, which is what happens after behavior. So antecedents are what happens or is happening in the environment before the behavior happens. They can be things that happened earlier but impact the circumstances just before. So sometimes they can go pretty far back, like missed breakfast is an environmental event that happens before behavior. And the way we would typically in everyday language talk about that is like you're hungry. Got bad news, which is an environmental event that could happen before, and then the way we might, just everyday language, you could say like you're sad or upset. Drank a lot of water, which what we call that is I have to pee. But so those are environmental events. We think about them, these things that are in parentheses are there in there for a reason, because those are kind of like the internal state that you feel, but like we can't see that. But things like we can know how much water you drank if we look for it theoretically, and we can see these other things. Or they can be things that happen right before the behavior. So like your brother grabs your toy without asking for it and takes away from you. A teacher might walk into a room and then behavior happens. Or stoplight turns yellow. And so all these things have a more obvious effect on behavior. Like brother takes toy without asking, and that's going to probably cause some kind of behavior like take it back or hit him or mom. Teacher walks into the room, maybe that will occasion like more appropriate behavior. Stoplight turns yellow, will make you slow down. Or they can be
Or speed up.
I'm here to tell you that the rumors are true. You can run red lights in Louisville and no one cares.
Oh my god.
Ignore that.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Okay. Or static circumstances, like things that are just happening. Like mom is present, there's an out of order sign on the vending machine, or there's a line at the bank. So things that are just kind of there. So there's no strict guideline for how long before the behavior it has to happen to be considered a relevant antecedent. Typically, the closer in time, the more likely that the antecedent is important. So you usually want to just look like what happens right before the behavior if you're trying to do an analysis. But sometimes, like those first 3 examples with like having to go to the bathroom, didn't eat breakfast, didn't sleep well, sometimes you have to zoom out to like find out things that are important to why the behavior is happening. So not all antecedents are relevant. When we behave like the person's on the chair, it's 70 degrees, like there's people sitting, people are nodding, it's sunny, I ate breakfast. Like millions of things are happening, but any of these things may or may not impact our behavior. As you learn more about ABA, you'll get a feel for what types of antecedents to look for. So if it seems a little funny at first, don't worry too much about it. Consequences. Consequences are what immediately follows the behavior, like antecedents. The closer to the behavior in time, the more likely the consequence is relevant to the behavior. The most important consequences are going to happen within seconds, or like, even over a minute is getting unimportant to a specific behavior because now other behaviors have happened. So this is more true with consequences than it is antecedents. Consequences, you really want to look like what happens right away. So consequences can be, and we talked about this a little bit before, they can be other people's behavior. So if you do something and then somebody says thank you, that's a consequence of your behavior. If you do something and then your boss says, you know what, I'm going to give you a raise, that's a consequence. If you do something and then a stranger gives you a dirty look, that's a consequence that may or may not affect your behavior in the future. Or if you do something and then your friend laughs, that's also a consequence. And all of those things have potential to affect your future behavior. Consequences, they can be general changes to the environment. So like a temperature increase, we used this example before, like turn on air conditioner is the behavior, and temperature increase, or turn on heat is the behavior, temperature increase is the consequence. Change in location, like climb tree, now you're in a tree is the consequence. I don't know why I chose that. I could have been like walked outside, now you're outside. Enter spaceship in space. Or like a volume decrease. So say it's loud outside, you shut the window and the environment gets more quiet. You turn down the volume on your radio, environment gets more quiet. Or they can even be changes in your own body. We consider those parts, we consider the body part of the environment in that sense. So like if you cut yourself and then you put pressure, that can like offset the pain. So if the behavior is squeezing, the consequence would be pain offset. Or if you put a bottle to your mouth and drink it, the consequence is you ingested water. Or like if you lie down in bed, the consequence is you will fall asleep. As with antecedents, lots of things might happen after a behavior, but we care about the ones that have an impact on behavior. These consequences fall into different categories based on their effect on behavior. So if you went out into the therapy room and watched a kid's behavior and you were going to record what was the consequence, you could record anything. So this training will hopefully, and like as we move through this training, hopefully it'll kind of like open your eyes to like the important consequences that tend to affect behavior. But so just some examples, you can have reinforcing consequences. So those make behavior happen again and they make it either continue or increase. Punishing consequences make behavior happen less and they make it decrease or stop happening. And if you'll notice, this is going to be like a recurring theme, but the consequences are defined by their effect on behavior, not on like candy is a reinforcing consequence. Maybe, but only if it makes behavior increase. Spanking is a punishment, maybe only if it makes behavior decrease. Behavior is like the main thing we're focusing on. So behavior is anything we do. Technically it includes thinking and talking. Usually we don't address thinking in the therapy that you guys are going to be doing because yes, you can, like I can observe myself thinking, but that's about it. Like other people can't observe what I'm doing. If you're going to know what I'm thinking, you're going to know that because I did some other behavior that you can see. But technically, like from just a general ABA perspective, we do think of thinking as a behavior. It does not include emotions or feelings, which sometimes can be hard for people to understand. But technically those are not behaviors. It doesn't include internal states like hungry, sleepy, dopey. Haha, that's a Snow White joke. And it doesn't include subjective labels like lazy, silly. Like, what's he doing? He's being lazy. Like, what does that mean? So this is a review. Hallmarks of ABA are ongoing measurement of behavior and data collection. So that's what we were talking about when we looked at all those graphs and seeing how our interventions were going. Interventions that involve, and the other hallmark is interventions that involve environmental changes. So now we're getting more specific. These environmental changes we're talking about are changes to antecedents and consequences. So therefore, to meet these two important goals of ABA, we have to think about all parts of the ABC unit as being observable and measurable. That's why I said thinking is not usually worked on in ABA therapy, and especially the behavior component of the unit, which is what we're going to talk about. So describing behavior, you want to use observable and measurable terms. Observable means, duh, that you can see it, or that you can tell that it happened. Even if only one person can observe it. So, you know, if I sing a song in my head, I can observe that, but nobody else can. So that's why we don't focus on it. And measurable means that in some way you should be able to. Oh yeah, can you change the brightness on that?
May work. It was just gonna-
It looks less blurry now though.
It's clear in the video.
Okay.
So measurable means you should be able to do at least one of these things. Count the behavior, which if you can see it, and because it's observable, you can see it and tell whether or not it happened, you should be able to count it. Like, happened. Some behaviors are weird, like singing. So if someone sings a song, how many times do they sing? Do you count each word? Do you count whatever? So sometimes you can time it. Like if you say like, oh, they sang for 20 minutes, or he went swimming for 20 minutes, or he studied for an hour. Oh, no. And then there's other dimensions that we can measure too, like we can measure intensity. So if someone's talking, you can measure with a decibel meter the volume. Or if someone hits, you can measure how hard they hit. Or if someone reads, you can measure how fast they're reading, like how many words per minute, you can get a rate. So those are all types of measurement. And as long as you can do at least one of those, we consider the behavior measurable, which means it is a behavior. Well, that doesn't mean it's behavior just because you can measure it, but it meets that requirement. So when we describe behavior, again, we're using observable and measurable terms. By doing this, it makes sure we're actually talking about behavior, so it stops us from intervening on something that's like going to be confusing to us. Like if we say lazy, and then we say like we're going to intervene on lazy, like how are we going to get to that part where we make the graph and say like he was 5 lazies that day? The laziness is decreasing. It makes it really hard.
So what if you put an operational definition to it?
Yes. So it makes sure we're actually talking about behavior, and it proves data collection. The more specific and objective the way we talk about it and define it, the better. So things that are not, these are examples of not behavior. Like what did Fritz do? He was happy. So like maybe if I showed a video of a kid who's like playing with bubbles and smiling, and you ask 50 people off the street, some of them might say, if you said like what's he doing, and they might be like, oh, he's happy. But like that's not what he's doing. He is happy, but he's doing actual things like smiling, playing bubbles, laughing, looking at his mom. Anne was lazy. I've already used lazy like 10 times. I won't bother with it. Winston was thirsty, so what if I showed a video of a kid being like, drinking, and say like, hey, what's up with this kid? A lot of people would be like, this kid's really thirsty. But like, the observable, measurable thing to call it is he's drinking. Darla acted like a jerk. This is, like Amanda said, there are behaviors that are associated with this. That is a typical pattern of behavior that we can label. But when you just say that general word, it's very subjective, and it makes it hard two different people to count it, because if I said like, Courtney, can you go every time Timmy in the therapy room acts like a jerk, I want you to tally it.
And they have a
That's
different
subjective,
definition of
too.
You're gonna have
Yeah.
a different, and then I tell somebody else to do it, they're gonna have different numbers, which is totally not what we want. We want a good, strong idea of what's happening with that behavior. So these are actual behavioral descriptions of the things we just talked about. So Fritz smiled and threw her trash on the ground, which, like, yes, we do call that lazy, but this is a more clear and complete way to talk about it. Winston grasped his throat and said, water. Oh, Winston.
I feel bad for him right now.
I talk of
He's thirsty.
this is a desert.
Darla said, your pie crust is tough and dry, which does make her a jerk, because you never want to talk about somebody's pie crust that way. It's a very sensitive subject. So let's play, is it a behavior? So we're just going to go through a list of things and identify which ones are not even behaviors at all, which ones maybe are descriptions, which are descriptions that you can improve to make it a more concrete and identifiable behavior, and then how will you improve them. So here's the list. Number 1, paying attention. Is that a behavior?
I mean,
Yes, but how do you know they're paying
no, it's
attention
actually
and not like
paying
zoned
attention.
out?
True,
Yeah.
so no.
Yeah, there's better ways to track it, or to talk about it. Like, you could say, you know, directing gaze at instructor, that you can time.
Mhm.
You still don't know whether they're actually
Paying
attending.
attention, right.
Yeah. So in this case, this is kind of off topic, but it's usually better to measure something else, like test, like, you know, can you respond to content questions, or can you completing work rather than like just facing the front. Being loving.
No, that's subjective too.
It's subjective, yeah. It is. I mean, there are behaviors that go with this, but it's better to say them. Like, I want you to count every time. I want you to track. If you say I want you to track every time the mom is loving towards their child,
Or till they hug. Or
that's
every
hard.
time they-
If you say like, being loving is defined as hugging, kissing,
say nice
touching,
things.
High fives.
making nice statements, like yeah, providing praise, then you get closer to like a good definition. Answering questions,
Yes.
Yes.
yeah. Hand flapping,
Yes.
yes. Even things like that though, it gets a little bit like,
How intense.
yeah,
Oh,
like if I do this, do you count it? So the more specific, the better. Being bratty,
No.
Subjective.
yeah, that's just like a subjective label. There are behaviors that go with it, like you could say crying, or like contrary statements. Saying positive statements. That one's hard. Like,
Because
positive is really subjective.
Right.
because if you define positive,
Right.
then
Yes. And sometimes, I mean, like it gets really hard to define behavior in like a good way where people, but the more specific, the better. Sitting.
Yes.
Being drunk.
No.
No.
what if you have a BAC breathalyzer?
Well, because it has to be defined as what drunk is.
Right.
Yeah.
It depends if it's like, because that would be like,
Two
if it's
beers
your blood
for you.
alcohol
Yeah.
4 beers
content.
for me.
Right, and if you're just measuring blood alcohol content, that's like that's not necessarily behavior, because you're not doing it. Like, you're not doing
It's
drunk.
like an internal process.
It's like measuring your
Doing
blood.
drunk, yeah.
Yeah, it's like measuring your blood pressure and saying you're having high blood pressure.
Gotcha.
But like, there are behaviors that go with being drunk, and you could
Maybe.
measure
Or
that.
maybe too.
You could measure drinking.
But that
Like,
depends on the
drinking
person.
would be the best thing to measure, and you could measure that by blood alcohol as like an indirect indicator. Spitting,
Yes.
yes. Tantruming.
Yes.
Yes, tantruming is a hard one though, because you would
Yeah,
want to
really
define
define.
something
Right.
more. Because a tantrum for one kid might mean like just kind of like
No.
shutting down and lying
Right.
down and being like no, and tantruming for another kid might be like
Throwing chairs.
losing their damn mind. Yeah. Getting upset. No. If you're saying upset, that's a feeling, so that's not even a behavior. But there are behaviors that go with it that you can define. Hitting.
Yes.
Yeah. Blinking.
Yes.
Yes. Being rude.
No.
No, because it's subjective. Talking back.
No.
No. Swearing.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Being tired.
Nope.
That's like one of those states. You guys are like 2. This is when I was like, I want fresh people that will get it wrong. So using the ABCs, we're going to use this ABC unit to study any behavior here at Meaningful Day and just generally working with populations like the ones we work with. We're using it for kids with disabilities. Really, ABA can be applied to anything and everything. It applies to your behavior as a therapist because a lot of times the consequence for your actions is the behavior of your client. So sometimes we can see like therapists avoid certain kids because they're aggressive, or maybe, you know, you still have to, you're going to be scheduled, so you're not going to not show up, but like your interaction is not as engaged. So you're going to observe the ABCs. This is how we use them. We observe them over time and look for overall patterns. So seeing it once might give us a hint about what's going on with this behavior, but really we want to like watch the behavior happen multiple times so that we can see a pattern. And then that helps us answer questions like, why does it keep happening? Under what circumstances does the behavior occur? So that'll be the antecedents, like it's always when mom's around. It's always when they have to work. It's always when they have to wash their hands. It's always when they have to go to the cafeteria. And those can be really helpful pieces of information. How can we make it occur more? If it's something that you want to see more of, like social initiations with kids on the playground. Maybe you see a kid with autism on the playground and they have plenty of language and no reason they can't do this, but they don't interact with other kids at all. They like circle or just like balance beam walk outside of the playground and do nothing. So then we want to see social interactions occur more. Or how can we make it occur less? Like obviously for challenging behaviors like aggression. So when we use them to like produce meaningful outcomes, we're going to combine our general knowledge about behavior, and that's those principles that we talked about that have been established through research, which are, one of them is that consequences can increase or decrease future behavior, which when it increases, it's called...
Oh, sorry, same thing.
When I'm reading. Consequences that increase future behavior are called...
Positive reinforcement.
And then consequences that decrease future behavior are called...
Negative.
Nope.
Oh.
Amanda? Positive.
Because negative doesn't necessarily mean bad.
reinforcement.
Does it?
No,
I mean,
it
it's just
doesn't.
taking something away.
Positive.
That'll be in a future training, by the way. Yeah, negative, positive reinforcement. Reinforcement is reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative.
Usually they're adding or taking away.
Right.
Yes. There is something that does decrease behavior, though.
It's like a block. I remember it from my psych class, and we like, because it's like
like a-
positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive something, negative something.
Yes. And it's it's like an everyday term that has its own common definition and then a technical ABA definition. The common definition are things like revenge and
Punishment.
Punishments.
Sorry. Punishing consequence. We just went over there. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm like, no, it's not that way.
I have my brain. We don't use it enough.
I know, it's not even, I didn't even include it in the training very much because we usually don't need to. And then so another principle is that antecedents can make behavior more or less likely. Like we say that reinforcement makes behavior happen more often, but when you see a red light, what do you do unless you're me this morning? Like when you see a red light, you stop. So it seems like that antecedent is affecting your behavior. It's really affecting your behavior because of consequences that have been associated with it, but if you just saw it one time, it looks like red light, stop. So we know these things, and because we know these things, we can take these general knowledge about behavior and combine it with individual observation of a particular person's behavior, and then we can create much better interventions that address the root causes of behavior for that person, like why are they doing it in the first place. So for like a preschool example that we went over before, where the little girl is crying because her mom stays when she cries, what would an intervention be?
Have mom drop off and leave.
Because the consequence that's making that behavior keep happening is staying, is mom staying. So you take away that you remove that consequence, and then you see if, and that's when we don't know, maybe that isn't the consequence. Maybe she cries because there's like a kid pinching her and no one sees. I don't know. But if that is the real reinforcer, then that behavior should stop, go away. So you're going to use this when you're working with your clients. This is going to be like your main go-to is these ABCs. You're going to end up, like I said before, every kid has a behavior plan written by their behavior consultant. And it'll have target behaviors and tell you what to do proactively and reactively to all these behaviors. It will never include every possible situation and every possible behavior that will ever happen. A lot of times in the moment, you're gonna need to be like, what is going on? And you're might be frustrated, might be confused, but if you always go back to this, like, okay, well, this is happening when this happens, and then this was the consequence, or what might be the consequence, like what would other people probably do when this happens, and that can give you an idea of a place to start. You will have ABA. Most of the procedures will have step-by-step directions, but you'll never get away from that analysis of behavior because behavior is different for every individual, and so you can never say, when a kid is aggressive, do this. Like, it's just not that simple, which is why your job is exciting, because you're not just here to like, good job. You're here to analyze their behavior and figure out what's going on and how you can improve it. Oh, what is this? This, I was just going to go over a few. So like if the scenario is a kid is in math class or just shows up to math class, they start all working, he throws his book on the floor, teacher says pick it up and do your work. He picks it up and starts to do his work. He like talks to his friend, he like says this is stupid, and finally the teacher says like, okay, go to the principal's office. What's the ABC?
The antecedent would be math class.
Right.
Math class, yeah.
Behavior was acting out in class.
And then consequence gets to leave.
Needs to leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
What if the scenario is we're in the training and you have to go to the restroom, and you open the door, walk down the hallway, and go to the restroom and pee. What's the A?
Drink too much fluid.
Behavior is,
Leaving to the
Leaving.
bathroom.
consequence of
Relief.
Yeah.
What if a kid is working and then what if a kid is working at the table with their therapist and then they're saying all done, and the therapist keeps working with them.
Antecedent is the work.
Task.
Yeah.
Behaviors.
Calling out.
Repetitively. Consequences, they still work. Therapist
Yeah.
pushes through.
Yeah. So it's not always, you would think in that scenario, like saying all done, a common consequence for that would be like being released from the task, but not always. So in the moment, it was what you guys said, keeping working. But if you kind of just think about it, like what that usually happens is
Somebody
at home,
yeah,
it would be like, okay,
it's
fine.
out. Or at school, they're like,
Right.
just like, fine, you're done.
Yeah.
Right, I can't
Yeah.
listen to you.
If the scenario is in Walmart, they're out, families at Walmart, kid picks up a toy, and the dad says, put it down, no toy, and she's like, but I want a toy. This is like a video that I watched. I didn't record it,
I've
but
seen that so many times.
I want a toy. No, put it down, put it down. This goes on for 20 minutes. Put the toy down. Walking down the hallway with the toy. Put it down, put it back. Nope, no toy. Put it back. Put it back. Grandma's gonna get your toy later. Put it back. Put it back. Okay.
So the antecedent was the toy?
Wanting the toy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Behavior, throwing a tantrum.
Right.
Consequence, promise of grandma getting the toy.
Right.
I was looking for videos that had good like little ABCs, and I was like, like it showed the tantrum, and I was like, is it gonna cut it off before you give in, or are they not gonna give in? And I was watching, and then he's like, Grandma's gonna get you a toy, and I was like, oh, there it is.
Grandma.
And that's it for this one. Oh, this lets you have your notes. This is a better version. If I would have known this, I would have put notes. Okay. Because normally the notes is that tiny little thing, and I'm like, I'm not going to read 5 paragraphs of this. Well, I'm like, as you can see. Okay. Did we start?
I did.
All right.
You can edit it.
So, yeah, that's fine.
Welcome to RBT.
Welcome. I seriously feel like this is like I'm on a spaceship. And I'm like introducing the world to how the new universe will be. Okay. So, welcome to RBT training. I don't know whether to look here at the camera or at your faces.
I think just whatever.
Maybe just our
We're gonna end up cutting a
faces.
lot of this out. Okay, so welcome to RBT training. This is the first training you guys are going to have. It's just a very general overview of what ABA is and how delightful it is. So this slide is going to be on every training. Sorry for the annoyance, but it's a requirement. So this training is based on the Registered Behavior Technician task list and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. So what that means is the BACB provides a list of tasks and knowledge areas that they want covered to be able to say like, okay, I did that training. So by the end of the training, we'll have hit all of those, and we'll provide a list of what they were. RBT training is a broader training. It's not meant to be just like, this is what we do at Meaningful Day, and these are our procedures. It's meant to cover generally what ABA procedures are for and the rationale behind them, and several procedures that we might use one or more of. But it'll give you a bit of a broader base so that you can kind of appreciate what you're doing when you're at work, and it'll obviously help you work better with your clients, and it should serve you very well moving forward because you can take this to job interviews, grad school interviews, whatever, and say like, I'm a registered behavior technician. A lot of people that do ABA therapy, that are ABA therapists, want to go into this field and work with this population. They want to become speech therapists or occupational therapists or behavior analysts or special ed teachers, and so this stuff will help you, will be extremely valuable in all of those areas. So you're welcome. Okay, ABA. What is ABA? Applied Behavior Analysis. So here's just a basic definition. It's coming up really well. Basic definition: ABA is when we use a scientific understanding of how the environment impacts behavior to change socially significant behavior. So we're going to break this definition down a little bit. There are 3 kind of important parts to this with 3 important implications. The first is that it's a science, so it's scientific. We're not just doing things willy-nilly or because we're like, I feel like I'm getting a vibe from this child, and so I'm going to do this with them. It's based on a lot of research. ABA is about environment behavior relations, which that can be kind of new for people. Some of it's very common sense, and then some of it is very seems backwards. but it's been demonstrated to be really effective. And then the last part is social significance, which means we're not doing this just because we can to control people's behavior, because we decide like, you have autism, I don't like that you're flapping your hands, I'm gonna make you not do that anymore. It's meant to be to help people to improve behaviors that are meaningful to them and that can help improve their quality of life. So science, the first one, and probably the one we're going to talk about the most. So science is all about like, why do things happen, how do things work, learning about variables and relationships between variables. For example, like, why does the sun come up? Why does my pen fall when I drop it? And it's about finding basic principles and understanding these things. So with ABA, we're not talking about molecules or like test tubes. The main variables we're concerned about are obviously number one, behavior. And like we said, it's socially significant behavior, so behavior that improves or harms people's lives. And then the other variable is our intervention, which usually they involve changes to the environment because of that second part of the definition. So we want to figure out, does changing one variable, the intervention, produce a change in the other variable, which is behavior. So our intervention is what you're going to be doing while you're here. Like, while you're here, you're going to be implementing teaching procedures, and you're going to be implementing behavior plans that are meant to address difficult behavior. So we want to see if those things you're doing actually impact the behavior. So the behavior we're talking about can be desirable behaviors like communication and language, listener skills, which are like, can you follow directions? Can you demonstrate that you understand what somebody said even though you're not talking? Social skills like eye contact or initiating play with other kids or people, conversation. Daily living skills, like skills that help you get through your day, such as toileting, cleaning, feeding, eating. I guess feeding and eating are the same thing. And then we are also talking about harmful behaviors that can have a huge impact on people's lives and their independence, like aggression, self-injury or self-injurious behavior, or sometimes we call it SIB because it takes a long time to say self-injurious behavior, or property destruction. So as you can imagine, those are behaviors that are a big deal and not just like, oh, they'll get over it. So those are the behaviors, and then the intervention, like I just said, is what you're going to be doing when you're here working with your client. You're implementing an intervention that we think will have an impact on behavior. So it has a lot of different names. You can call it like the intervention, ABA therapy, teaching procedures, behavior reduction strategies, behavioral programming. All these things are kind of things we use to talk about what you guys are actually doing. And then, so how do we find out if there is a relationship between our intervention and this person's behavior? We take data. This is not the first time you'll be hearing about data during this training, and it's not the last you'll see of data while you're working here. Data is a huge part of your job. So we use this data to measure behavior with and without intervention. You're not going to really be doing the without part. That happens first. A lot of times the behavior consultant or an assessment specialist will do an assessment, and that's when they find out, like, okay, as it is now, without anybody trying to systematically intervene on this behavior, what's happening with the behavior? Nothing. They are not showing any listener skills. They're not showing any communication, or they're showing like high levels of aggression. So that's without it. And then we take data while we implement the intervention. So data is a defining feature of ABA. And then we compare with and without to see if our intervention is making a difference. So basically the question we're asking is our treatment effective? And we're approaching it in a scientific way with objective data rather than like, I think he's getting better. I think like, oh look, he's learning. Oh, he looked at me. It means that they don't have autism anymore. Because as you can imagine, those can be a little bit of an indication of behavior change, but especially with kids who have disabilities and their parents, and kids who have really, really challenging behavior, these subjective reports of behavior change get really skewed and biased really fast, because a kid can have had no aggression for 2 weeks and then they have an awful day, and then the family says their behavior's not getting better, it's getting worse. But really, like, if you just look at it on paper, you can see the changes a little bit more clearly. So is our treatment effective is the big question. So this happens on 2 levels. Research, which is not us, but kind of exciting. It's becoming us a little bit. We have like little fingers in a few research projects that might actually be published through our practicum students with Spalding. But basically, well, actually that's coming out the next slide. And then clinical, which is us. So we want to demonstrate in the research that a treatment is effective, and we want to show that when we're actually doing it, it's effective with this particular client. So at a research level, interventions are tested in controlled research studies. It's basically the same as what you guys do, except a lot more control and a lot of paperwork. Like we're kind of more on the fly and closer to the natural environment. We can't always control, like we might have staff change at the last minute and stuff like that. So what we do is not research. And then so when they do research, the more times intervention is shown to be effective with an individual, the better evidence that it's generally effective. So those are the strategies that we're using. We're using things that have a lot of support behind them. Research is also used to identify basic principles. So even if it's sometimes you might be like, that behavior consultant just made that protocol up. They're doing it based on principles that have been identified in research, like reinforcement and extinction, which we'll learn about later. And then clinical, this is us. So support and research never guarantees effectiveness for any particular kid. So we never tell a parent, we can say that ABA has been demonstrated to create large gains when it comes to autism, but we never say like your child will respond to ABA or to discrete trial therapy, because we don't know that. We haven't ever done research on that kid. So you kind of consider every case an experiment. That's why your data that you take is so important, because you know research shows that there are kids that don't respond to ABA. So if that's the case, we want to identify that early and not waste people's time and money. So we're constantly measuring progress to see if we're effective. You measure behavior on a daily basis every time you work with the kid. And then the kind of a hallmark of ABA is we use that data to individualize treatment and to respond to the data. So if we see that we're trying to teach a kid a skill and they haven't made any increases in 14 days, then that's when we flip it up, which is different from a lot of other areas, like even school. Like a lot of times kids will, if you've ever, I used to work in a first grade classroom, and there's like a handful of kids who the instruction is very appropriate, there's a handful of kids who are way ahead, and then there's a handful of kids who spend the whole time like floundering and lost, and maybe the teacher, it's one teacher, 20, 30 kids, it just stays that way. And it stays that way for probably that kid's like whole life. So that's exactly what we don't want, and that's why we take data. So we're going to practice a few little, can you see this in the, kind of. So here's an example of the type of data that we take. I don't know how clear this will be in the video, but you can always check the slides in either the training binder or on Dropbox. So this is an event. Elsa's assignments completed is the behavior that we're tracking. Over here it's kind of hard to read, but it says number of assignments completed, and then this is each week. So this was before, this was what I was talking about when I said like measure the behavior without intervention and with intervention, so we can compare. Because you could say like, look, we're using this if you never did this, we're using this intervention and now they're completing so many assignments, but what do you compare it to? You have to know that they were doing so crappy before. So it was down, I can't see these numbers, but it was like 1, 2, nothing. Intervention, which was a statistical Likert chart. And then their behavior improves, so how would we respond to this data if we were looking at it?
You'd use a sticker chart.
Yeah, it was obviously
It
pretty
works.
effective and it's getting better. So this is an instance when we would say like, do it, keep it, no modifications. And then how would we respond to? And then also while we're looking at these, think about what it looks like on paper, but then think about how it feels for the person taking the data and interacting with the behavior at each data point. So this is instances of aggression per day or per week. Yeah, I think that's like 5, 4, 3. And then here's when we put our intervention. Oh, cut it out. I think the intervention was, it's spanking. The intervention is spanking. So what do you guys think about this one? Effective or not effective?
Consistent.
Not consistent. We might need more. I mean, like, this looks good, that looks good. It's kind of variable and you kind of don't know what's going on. So it's not like, yes, this is so good. It might be a situation when you say, if the aggression is severe, you might say, cut it, we have to figure something else out. Or if it's not that severe, you might say like, well, look at these 2 last ones, maybe it's going well. What about you can't see it very well. Okay, so what it's supposed to be is, the intervention is supposed to say spanking. Pretend this is a kid who stays with 2 different parents, divorced parents. These are days when the kid is with mom, and then these are days when the kid is with dad. So weeks. This week they were with mom. Tenants is a week. It's almost like 2 separate data paths. And these are things that our data will tell us, because when we fill out our data sheets, they say therapist name, this person, this was mom, this was the date. So you do get this kind of information from the type of data that you collect while you work. So what would you do now that you know this?
First, were they using the same intervention?
Yeah, you see
Okay.
some, like, now you see why that
Yeah.
variability. Maybe if it's spanking, maybe dad spanks harder.
You want videoing?
If it's spanking, maybe dad spanks harder. Or maybe mom spanks and then hugs. You know what I mean? So yeah, you would look, are they using the same intervention? Are they being consistent? And why is it effective for dad and not for mom? So then so that's what your data will do, will point you in certain directions to figure out. This is like data that I made up, so don't look too far into it.
How hard were these things? What were you using? And
Yeah. Like, what happened here on Tuesday? So what about this data? So here's baseline identifying colors. So this is like you're trying to teach a kid to, if you say like, what color is it? Like, oh, what color is this? Ducky. Yellow. So baseline, obviously they just don't have the skill. And then this is % correct. So that means maybe if you ask them 10 times, how many times out of 10 do you get? Do they answer correctly? So what do you guys think?
Need
The
more.
interventions aren't working.
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
I mean, going up a little bit. Not
yeah,
enough.
praise is not working for this kid.
Praise, yeah. And intervention,
Means
praise, correct
stickers.
answers means
Good job.
good job. That's true. It could also be a case of sometimes
Just not-
this isn't in here. Yeah, sometimes our kids just learn really slowly, and it's like systematic, teach, and then like boom, they start to pick up pace. So this is also an instance when you would like think about what you know about the learner. If you know that that's their pattern of learning, then you would be like, okay, let's give it more time. If you either don't know them or you know that they usually learn fast, then like this sucks.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends. And
it's
it's
day to
prompt
day
strict.
too. It's not like a month. you
Right.
know,
This
so-
is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, it's 9 days. So it's like a lot of our kids, we don't expect to pick up a new skill in a week or 2.
Right.
So it might be okay. It depends. This also doesn't tell you, we also use prompting to kind of help. So maybe it's like, maybe here, these all required full physical prompts for everything. And they're getting incorrects, but they're not actually incorrect. They're prompted with a gesture. So maybe they are improving. Or maybe there was a lot of challenging behavior that stopped them from even really focusing on the task here, and then they're finally starting to like actually work at the table, and then you're seeing improvement. So you kind of combine the data with like your common sense, anecdotal knowledge about what's going on. But so like you guys said, first initial action was intervention is, so this would be an example of what we would do. So it's still identifying colors. We tried praise, skip. Now we're gonna praise, oh, well I threw in that prompting story, but forget I said that. So now we're not just gonna praise when they get it right, we're also gonna prompt them to get it right, and then praise it, and then like, oh. So it looks good. But then think about how the therapist feels on February 17th.
It's not working.
At that point, it doesn't look too good, yeah. But I mean, you saw those two data points. Yeah, sometimes you have, it doesn't always look like 60%, 70%, 80%. Sometimes it looks like it's like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. But this helps us see project progress much better. So here's another one. This is screaming during homework. This is the baseline. You can't see this very well, but you get the idea. Baseline's in the middle. How does this intervention look?
It's systematically going down the 3 things.
Like if you, like this, it looks good, but like here.
I think it's getting better, in fact. It is definitely going better.
It's just a willful child.
Yes, and we know enough about behavior to know that sometimes when you start an intervention, things get worse a little bit because the kid is realizing like, what? I've done things this other way, and you're not going to make me change my behavior so easily. So they give a little bit of a hard time. But it looks good, except I feel like the parent here and here is going to be like, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore. So that's why it's important to show data to our therapists and to families so they can say objectively, like, I know it felt like a terrible day on Tuesday, look what's happening. It's not so bad, especially now it's kind of leveling off. And that's also why you want to give interventions like a little bit more time. So sometimes you might have, every kid you have will have a behavior support plan, and you're supposed to follow the plans in that plan. There might be special procedures that you get trained on additionally because new behaviors happen all the time. The behavior support plan is never going to cover every single behavior, every change in the kid's behavior. So the behavior consultant might come and say like, we're seeing this aggression, we're going to try this. So that's why it's important that you follow the plan as best you can the way it's written so that we can see this and we can give it a little bit of time. Even if you feel like, I don't think this is working, you might be right, but you might be wrong. Okay, the next part is ABA is all about behavior, environment, relationships. So when we said before the 2 variables that we're looking at were, with all the graphs, our behavior, or our client's behavior, and our intervention, so that's the relationship we're looking at. Does the intervention change behavior? What we really mean is, does the environmental manipulation that we're doing change behavior? Because that's primarily what our interventions are. If we look back, intervention they got all jacked up. But the intervention is follow through with task during screaming during homework. So screaming during homework happens, and we decide, let's see what happens if we just force them to do their homework no matter if they're screaming and just work through it. And that's part of the environment, because now that kid, when they scream, that's something that happens in their environment. They have to do homework. For this one, prompting, like praise is something that happens in the environment because it's somebody else's behavior in that kid's environment. So mom, who's praising the correct colors, is changing that kid's environment by introducing praise contingent upon correct behavior. Praise correct. This said it was supposed to be spanking. Spanking's obviously a change to the environment because you behave one way and then, ow, my butt. Your environment just changed. Intervention. Oh, this is the same thing. Sticker chart is obvious too because you behave a certain way, you complete your assignments, and now your environment changes. You got a sticker, which to a lot of kids is like hitting the lottery. Okay. So that's what we mean when we say behavior environment. We're talking about our interventions. Our interventions are not, we don't prescribe medicines because that's not our field. They're behavioral environmental interventions. So typical changes to the environment that are usually involved in our interventions are changing consequences. So consequences can involve the behavior of other people, like you behave a certain way, I give you a sticker. You behave a certain way, I spank you. You behave a certain way, I praise you. Or they can be other consequences, like for example, if the room gets cold, if you touch the air conditioner, room gets cold, it didn't come from another person, but it's still a consequence that something in your environment changed because of your behavior. And then we also do things, we create changes to the antecedent environment. Antecedent means what is happening before the behavior or the setting. So before the behavior has a chance to happen, we can make changes. Like we can put visual aids, maybe a kid doesn't ask for help when they need it, so we put a little sign on their desk that says like, remember you can ask for help. That's an antecedent change that we want to help the behavior happen. Environmental arrangements, so say you work with a kid and your desk faces out to the playroom where everybody's playing. The kid is facing everybody else, you're facing the wall, and your kid is like, hi, like just not giving you any attention. Simple environmental arrangement is face the kid towards the wall so that you can focus their attention on you and the tasks that you're working on. Rules and social stories are something we do sometimes. Like sometimes you can just, you can have a big impact on behavior if you just tell a kid a simple rule, like if you do this, this will happen, or here is a set of rules, or here's a story about a behavior that we want you to do that's really important. Like maybe if the kid has kind of an irrational fear of dogs, and if you just, they're called social stories, and it's like, my name's Bob, I am afraid of dogs, but dogs can be friendly, dogs help people, dogs blah blah blah. If I am in a situation where I see a dog, I can ask my mom, I feel scared, and I can leave if I want, and it kind of lays it out in a more clear and complete way. Prompting is obviously something we do to help behavior happen before it actually happens. It's not a consequence. And then we can change the requirement. So sometimes kids have engage in a lot of challenging behavior because their work is too hard. So, like unreasonably hard. Not just they don't want to do it or they're trying to get out of it. Like it really is too hard for them. So simple changes to curriculum can be really effective. So ABA compared to other fields and then just everyday interpretations of behavior. I know we talked about before how behavior is a science, which you think of like chemistry, well behavior is not a science, but ABA is a science about behavior. You think of chemistry as a real science and you think of physics as a real science, but like everybody's an expert on behavior, so it's kind of like, it's so subjective, but we don't look at it that way. We take measurable objective data and we see how the environment affects behavior. So typical reactions to behavior, just like if you ask anybody, why does that person do that? Why does that person act that way? They're going to give you things like character traits, maybe. Like, oh, they do that because they suck. They do that because they're lazy. They do that because they're really smart. They do that because they don't care about other people. They do that because they're spoiled. They do that because they're stupid. They do that, like, you could come up with a million reasons, and we all, like, I do this too. This is how people understand behavior of other people. Or sometimes you might get emotions like, oh, they're doing that because they're upset. They're doing that because they're frustrated. The field of psychology, which ABA is part of psychology, but like kind of a more mainstream psychology approach to behavior will say like they're doing that because they have autism, or they're doing that because they have schizophrenia, or they're doing that because they have a trauma history. They're doing that because that they're 3 years old. That's what 3-year-olds do. That's what developmental stage they're in. Or they're doing that because they have separation anxiety or depression. And ABA is very different in that sense. Because, so for example, take a story of a little 3-year-old who is going to preschool for the first time, and her mom drops her off, and then she is like, "Ah!" Just like screaming, crying, and the mom is like, "No, my baby, like I'm a terrible mother, I'm abandoning my child." And so she cries, and then the mom sticks around, and the mom cries, and the teachers are like, "It's okay, we'll work through it." And she's like, "Okay, I'm just gonna stick around and watch, we'll see." And she cries, and then the teacher and the mom together decide like, "Okay, well, stick around for 15 to 20 minutes. If it lasts past that, maybe we just go ahead and take her home." And so, which is like, I've worked in preschool, that's kind of like how it works. And so they decide that, and then that happens, and they take her home. She comes the next day, maybe she cries for like 15, sometimes she stays, sometimes she goes home. So what are the different reasons for, like, okay, why does that happen? So from a everyday kind of like, if you ask anyone off the street, what would they say? Why is she crying?
She's 3.
She's 3. Separation anxiety. She's a brat. Like she's
spoiled.
She's immature, spoiled. Yeah, that's what. And then like this. If she's a typically developing kid, you probably wouldn't get a diagnosis or anything about trauma, but you would say like she's 3. Separation anxiety.
And there are things like if her parents recently get divorced or died recently, they have.
Right.
No, sorry.
Right.
Was she adopted from Ukraine?
Right. She doesn't like preschool. Like she doesn't want to be, like, common sense things, like she doesn't want to be away from her mom, which are true. And then so developmental psychology, young, she doesn't have the coping skills to cope with that transition, separation anxiety. She's upset, she's scared. To people who are just everyday untrained people off the street, like she's a piece of work, she's spoiled. I put the little star because you might not say that about someone going to preschool, but little kids crying for other reasons in Walmart.
People are
They
always
say about babies. They say about babies
Right.
all the time. Like,
That
my
baby
kid
is spoiled.
3 months old. I'm like, I think she's spoiled.
She doesn't even know yet.
She doesn't know.
Yeah. So an ABA analysis thinks about environment and behavior. So what's the behavior of concern? What's the behavior that's like concerning us?
The
Crying. And then what happens in the environment when she cries?
Mom stays.
Mom stays.
Yeah, mom coddles her.
Mom stays. Mom says like, "Baby, come here. I'll play with you. Let's get started here." Mom stays, or mom gives her attention. And then what's the effect on the 3-year-old's behavior?
She cries.
She gets relieved.
And she cries regularly. More. So side note, just because ABA focuses on behavior environment analysis doesn't mean that all those other things we talked about don't exist or, aren't important and not related to behavior. Emotion, like when we said like the little girl is scared or upset, like she is scared and she is upset. It's not that those things are not true or not there and not important, obviously, to her and her mom. It's just they're not the focus of ABA because they can kind of distract from that, like, well, what's the environment behavior relationship here? And physiology, genetics, pharmacology, obviously all those things do affect behavior. So when we say like, oh, a psychologist would say they're doing that because they're on 10X. And like, they're right. Those things do change behavior. It's just not part of ABA as a field. We do interact with those fields and it is an important interaction, but we're not the ones who like are trained well enough to say what those effects on behavior are. And of course, an understanding of diagnosis is super important. Like if someone's diagnosed with autism, we're not saying that like they learn to act that way, you know, when they were 1. Obviously, there is something going on with their brain. We just really don't know what it is, because an autism diagnosis at this point is not like a brain scan or a blood test. It's like observation of behaviors. So really, we're looking at the behavior, and the ABA takes like a direct attack at the behaviors. Obviously, we want, you know, neuroscientists to keep studying autism and figure out what it is. It's just that's not ABA. So observable behavior and environmental events are the focus of our science, because behavior can be seen and measured. Like when you say like how much autism does this kid have, you're talking about their behavior. So we just focus on the behavior. Environmental changes can be easy to implement. You can't always change someone's emotions. Like if you say somebody's doing something because they're angry, then like, okay, I don't know how to make someone not angry other than changing their behavior. And it's also these like relatively simple environmental changes. They're based on decades and decades of research, so they do have an important relationship with behavior. Environment is not the only relationship with behavior. Like emotions do interrelate with behavior, and a diagnosis does, and your biology and your genetics do, and any medications you might be on also impact your behavior. But it's just the environment is one that can be very powerful at also changing your behavior too. The last part of the definition was social significance. So this means that before researchers and practitioners even attempt to change a behavior, they ask questions like, why should this behavior be changed? Should it be changed? Who will this behavior change really benefit? A lot of times parents say like, my kid is driving me nuts. They don't listen to anything I say. They never follow instructions. And then if you go watch, it's like, no, they comply like 70% of the time, which is pretty normal. So we kind of always have an ethical obligation to our clients to say like, who is this benefiting? If a teacher's like, that kid taps his foot and it drives me insane, like that's not a socially significant behavior. So we kind of have to think from the client's perspective, is this behavior change in the person's best interest? More questions, will this behavior change improve the person's well-being? Does this person want this change? A lot of times you mostly won't work with adults, but adults, it gets real tricky when you get into working with adults because they have rights like anybody else. So we can't come in and say like, smoking is a hugely social significant behavior. Of course it gives you cancer, it ruins your life, it ruins your relationships. I'm gonna change this for this person. Like, nope, you don't make interventions for your friends who smoke, no matter how much you don't like punish them or like put them on a token economy for not smoking. So does this person want this change? This gets different with kids, because you'll notice when you start working, a lot of what you do, like it doesn't look like that kid wants that change because they're giving you a really hard time. That's a little bit different, and that we kind of look to the parents. And then are the intervention procedures acceptable to the individual, their loved ones, stakeholders, society? So we might, like, basically do the ends justify the means. We might be able to change a behavior, but if we're like, if we're abusing them in the process, then we don't do that. Hopefully you won't ever feel like that's what's happening here at Meaningful Day, because we don't really have crazy procedures. But in the past, ABA had kind of like a rough start, because as you can imagine, it's so powerful, and we didn't know as much as we know now, and a lot of it was based on just like punishment and kind of like arbitrary reinforcement. Yeah, shock. So like really, really, really bad stuff. So, and implemented by people who didn't understand the disabilities of the people who they were working with, didn't understand their behavior, and just now have this tool that can really change the behavior of somebody, and it can lead to really like power hungry and abusive situations. And then how much and how fast will the behavior need to change in order to consider it worthwhile? That kind of goes back to that one graph where you're like 10%, 9 days. Like, yeah, you're seeing improvement, but is it worth it? Like, what if you have a kid who engages in like headbanging and it's life-threatening, and you're going to see like a 2% decrease every month? Like, cool, but they still might die. So, do you want to look at, is it enough change?
You also have to think about that too when you're doing the home piece, because if the intervention that you're going to do in the home is going to completely turn it upside down, like, we have families that have like 4 children, and you're going in there and if you completely turn it upside down to where they can't cope, then that's probably not the best intervention.
And are the intervention procedures acceptable to the individual? It's their loved ones. Yeah. It's not just, is it acceptable for like gushy, huggy, feely reasons. Is it acceptable? Because if it's not, then they probably won't do it, and you're not going to see any change anyways. So a review. ABA is science. She blinded me with science. I wanted to have that like pop up as a little sound. I'll just do it myself.
Or can rewind it and I can do it.
Yeah, and then I'll just put the bling. No one will know. So ABA is a science. It's an analysis of behavior, environment, relations, and changes to the environment. And if that looks a little bit, if this is all new to you and that seems kind of like, what the hell are you talking about? We'll get into that. We'll get way into that. It's meant to produce meaningful changes that improve people's lives. And it's a field supported by substantial empirical research. So when you tell people what you do, you can say, I do all of these things. ABA is not, I change lives. People get really picky about this. There's like behavior analysts out there. When you say applied behavioral analysis, they're like, so it's applied behavior analysis. I don't know if you guys have heard of DTT, or discrete trial therapy, or discrete trial teaching, discrete trial training, but that's what we do here a lot of the time. ABA and DTT are not exactly the same thing. DTT is a teaching method that falls under the ABA umbrella. It's a very specific set of teaching procedures. ABA is not bribery with candy, which might, if you talk to a teacher and a behavior analyst, maybe they met one behavior analyst in their whole life, and they came to the school and said like, here, give them a sticker chart, and they get candy every time they behave. So sometimes that's how it comes across. It's totally not what it is. I mean, we might use edibles to reinforce behaviors, but that's not all we are. We're not like, I've heard people say, they've run into people and they're like, oh, you're the M&M lady. That's not it. ABA is not ignoring behavior. Sometimes we do ignore challenging behavior, and that can be one of the hardest things for people to understand why we do, and one of the hardest things for people to actually do. But that's not all ABA is either. It's not, this is important when you talk to parents. ABA is not a cure for autism. There is a ton of research saying that ABA methods can, whoopsies, get out of here. ABA can cause a lot of progress with an autism diagnosis, and can teach a lot of behaviors that are missing for a child that has autism, and can decrease a lot of challenging behavior, but nowhere does it say that like, oh, you have autism, here, have ABA, and then you'll recover or be cured. Even kids do, quote, recover and kind of like lose their diagnosis. They improve so much that now they don't meet that criteria anymore. Like when a physician or a psychologist sees them, they're like, I don't see it. But having known kids and families where that happens, there's a lot of times it's like there's still issues. But there's still a little, and ABA is not a proven treatment for any individual. So you can say that research supports ABA, and it has had demonstrated effectiveness, but you don't say ABA is proven effective. End of story. So when you talk about this, now hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what you will be doing or have been doing if you already work here. A lot of this you probably already know. but maybe this might fill in some gaps. So you're probably going to want to go talk about, like, you know, everybody talks about what they do, and you might talk to parents. So just when you do use it, this was a lot of information that we just went over. You want to probably be careful with technical language. If you say, like, ABA is a science that focuses on behavior, environment, relationships to affect change in behaviors of social skills, they're going to be like, go away. So usually you want to say something like, you know, we use systematic teaching strategies, and we teach skills or decrease harmful behavior, or you can talk about how ABA uses data the way a lot of other teaching methods don't to monitor progress, and individualized treatment and treatment response to data. You can talk about those things. You could just say, like, you know, we work on increasing appropriate behavior and decreasing inappropriate behavior are good ways to talk about. Avoid, again, back to this, promising any kind of effectiveness or saying, like, I cure autism, or like I help, you know,
Never
Be
say
rich.
I
help
cure
kids
autism.
when,
Yeah.
yeah, right? Yeah, you just, like, in case you haven't gotten that point, don't say that to parents or anybody else. So welcome to ABA. While it is not a cure or improvement treatment for any individual, it has significantly improved the behavior of literally thousands of individuals. Like, if you went through, there are a lot of journals, and everyone has 3 studies, and there's, you know, volumes and volumes and volumes, not including all the clinics that are out there. ABA has a lot of impact. It has allowed people whose behavior subjected them to highly restricted, dependent, and sometimes dangerous situations, like hospitals or running out into the street, to experience independence and exercise increased control over their own circumstances, happiness, and needs. It has developed social communication, early learning, and academic skills for many individuals who use these skills to further enrich their own lives. Just a little FYI, you know, it wasn't too long ago when, like, you had autism or Down syndrome and you were, like, just automatically institutionalized. Like, boom. Like, even,
Years ago.
like, in the 50s and 60s. And, like, that was just what happened. Down syndrome, even. Like, can you imagine putting someone with Down syndrome in and a lot of them, they had, like, think about our kids with their severe behavior, and think about if you don't understand it or know how to respond to it, and the way you respond probably just makes it worse. Like, these kids would just go off, and they would just be in restraints all day to keep them safe, or like padded cell. And these are kids who
Or
are
heavily medicated.
for reals or heavily medicated. It's like, no more behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ABA is huge for our population. I think that's it. Woo-hoo. And that took 46 minutes. That's not what I anticipated.
Do you think
But
it would be longer?
is this a stop?